Imagine another person living inside of you. And I'm not talking about pregnancy. I'm talking about another adult inside of you. He has a different face shape, a different nose shape. He gets up 2 hours later than you, and he likes licorice, which you hate, like me. 2 personalities in one person. 2002, pregnant Lydia Fairchild divorces her husband and takes a DNA test to get benefits. Material is taken from her husband, their 2 shared children, and an infant. The test reveals that Lydia's husband is indeed the father of all the children expected. But Lydia herself, who gave birth to the children in front of witnesses, is not their mother for some reason. How is that possible? Was the baby switched on the way out of the vagina, or was Lydia a surrogate mom, implant herself an embryo, raised it, and gave birth to it? The court says the latter, yes. So Lydia stole an embryo, carried it to term, and gave birth. Trial, seal, life sentence. But when they DNA tested Lydia's mom, she turned out to be the grandmother of all the kids. So the mom's not the mom, but the grandmother on her side is the grandmother. Well, how the hell is that possible? Genes that skipped a generation from grandmother to granddaughters, bypassing mom? Of course not. Lydia was just born a genetic chimera, a living paradox. 2 sets of DNA twisted together inside one body. 2 genetic codes sharing a single life. In the myths of ancient Greece, a chimera was a monster with the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and a snake-like tail, and Bavarian fairy tales told of a deer rabbit with the wings of a chicken. But Lydia was a chimera of a different sort. 2 Homo sapiens living in the same body. How did that happen? As an embryo, Lydia had absorbed her twin sister, and their bodies had literally fused together. Because of this, half of Lydia's cells are her own, and the other half are her sister's, and those are the ones that were accidentally analyzed. Imagine the unborn sister evenly distributed throughout Lydia's body and blended in. Lydia's uterus, sister's blood. 1 finger from one finger from the other, you can't tell. But then who was the mother of all these children? Was it the sister who wasn't even born? Was this person not born and was able to pass on her genes and become a mom? Actually, this question makes no sense, because in fact, we call Lydia a common organism consisting of 2 people at once. She's like Siamese twins, only in reverse. Not 1 embryo split into 2, but 2 embryos fused into 1. In the end, when Lydia's vagina was swabbed, those cells actually turned out to be related to her children. So at the very least, this body's uterus is the genetic mother of all 3 children. Lydia turned out to be innocent. Scientists know of about 100 cases like this simply because not everyone has a genetic test. In fact, there are many more double people on the planet. You can go your whole life without even realizing you are a chimera. But in a way, every one of us is a chimera, because we are made up of the genes of 2 different people at once, a father and a mother. And those genes strictly tell us what kind of body to build. For example, your figure is 70% genetically determined. No matter how much you try, no matter how much you work out, without chemistry, you will never be like this kid who just got lucky with this genetic mutation. He was born with a broken muscle growth limiter, the protein myostatin. Normally it slows down metabolism, so you don't have to feed a pile of muscle. This guy doesn't have it, so he looks like a Belgian blue cow. She has this mutation by default, and look, it doubles her muscle mass. And when we injected these genes with the mutation into mice, their muscles also doubled without any training. That's how much genes define us. But there's a lot more to them than our looks. And you could get temperament from one parent, addictions from another, intelligence from mom, immunity from dad. But what about the number of children? Love of pickles, longevity, and ability to make money. Does all that come with the genes too? But what else is hidden in there? And most importantly, can we influence it? Sit back, we're going further down the rabbit hole. We're all spontaneous geneticists. Do you remember the phrases of relatives like mom's eyes, dad's nose, dad's personality, mom's gait? On an intuitive level, you and I know how it's inherited. A little bit from dad, a little bit from mom. That's it. It used to be explained by consanguinity. That is, the blood of the mother and father are 2 liquids that literally mix in the child, and all the signs of the parents are therefore averaged in it. That's why the nobility were afraid of consanguinity with commoners. because then all their nobility, honor, dignity, and funny noses will disappear from the family, and then it would be unclear who was noble. Everything changed in the 17th century with the invention of the microscope. Surely the first person to be left alone with it began to look at their bodily fluids, blood, saliva, and semen. Surely it must have been the first. And when that person saw a bunch of swarming sperm cells in the microscope, then another theory replaced the consanguinity theory. People decided that a homunculus, a tiny but fully formed human being, lived in the germ cells. During conception, it passes into the mother's body and develops under the influence of her environment, increasing in size. Now you know where the legs of these strange videos from 2015 grow from. After all, homunculus in translation is a little man. Today we know that hidden inside sperm and egg cells is not the man himself, but the instructions for its creation. That is, DNA. How many DNA molecules do you think are in one cell nucleus? 46. That's a total of 2 meters of DNA rolled up to the size of a single cell. It's such a tightly packed structure that it's like the Eiffel Tower rolled up to the size of a matchbox. This supercoiled DNA is called a chromosome. We get 23 of these weenies from mom, 23 from dad, for a total of 46 chromosomes. You think the number 46 has some kind of sacred meaning? No, there isn't. No sacred meaning to you. Every organism on the planet has a different number of chromosomes. Flies have 8, a pea has 14, and a horse has 64. Chimpanzees are close to our number of 48, but a potato has exactly the same number of chromosomes. A crayfish has 200, but this plant has almost 1,500. Why? Because it's just the inertia of history. It's evolutionary. If you go even further, then going to the store, you can find a cake, and it too will have chromosomes. There are 42 of them, by the way. And because it is baked from wheat, wheat has 42 chromosomes, but cream, for example, will have 60 chromosomes, because that's how many are in cow's milk. If you want to know how many more chromosomes anything at all in our world has, ask a question in the comments. We will answer you. Now, you see where I'm going with this. What matters is not the number of chromosomes, but how they work. It is through chromosomes that genetic information is passed on. See, each chromosome has a pair, the first and the second, and so on, up to the 23rd. The genes in each pair often code for the same things, from earlobes to the ability to curl your tongue into a tube. When I decide to conceive, both chromosomes in the pair will randomly swap genes, and then one of them will go into the sperm. And so there can be billions of different variations of sperm uniquely. From such a great randomizer, each one is made unique. You know what's truly unique? Sperm. There could be 7, 8, 10 million sperm in your biospecimen, and they're all unique. That's what's so amazing. And you can even see it under a microscope. Some sperm are smooth and beautiful, others are crooked and weak, and some are two-headed mutants. But only the healthiest and fastest will reach the egg. There they will find other 23 chromosomes with random genes, female, from this sum of 46 chromosomes, and get a child so unique that such a child has not yet walked on the surface of our planet. And here's something that surprised me. If we men produce spermatozoa every day new, then in girls, they are formed at the embryo stage, that is, before the birth of the egg are formed, further only spent. And if you seriously think so, then each girl pregnant with a girl, it is in fact a kind of human nesting doll. A girl grows inside the girl in which future children are already growing. That is, they are created. Anyway, people have been right all along. And when they thought about consanguinity, and when they thought about homunculi, in the sense that the main rule, a little bit from dad, a little bit from mom, really works. And thanks to that rule, you can figure out today what your and your partner's baby will look like. You fill in your photo and your partner's photo. Neural network shuffles facial features like a deck of cards and shows you a possible child. It turns out that all of our heredity is pieces of what our parents had. But then why do brown-eyed parents have blue-eyed children? Or did you and your husband have type 4 blood, but the baby was born with type 1 for some reason? Cheating? Not always. A MindWorld viewer will tell you. It's just that sometimes what was hidden deep inside us is inherited. The pigment melanin is responsible for eye color. Normally it's brown, but if its gene stops working, the color will be blue. Now remember that our genes are stored in 2 copies, so if one melanin gene breaks down, it will be backed up by the second and the eye color will still be brown. But if such brown-eyed parents give their child exactly the broken copy, the melanin gene in the child will not work and the eyes will be light-colored. So light-colored eyes are, in fact, a mutation. Nature designed us all to be brown-eyed. But 10,000 years ago, one of our ancestors lost the melanin gene, and he passed that mutation on to his children. So scientists are inclined to believe that all blue-eyed people on the planet are descendants of one particular blue-eyed man. I wish I could say to him, "Hello, Father." Unfortunately, this same mechanism is used to transmit diseases. That is, a harmful mutation can be stored in your lineage for hundreds of years, but then it can be activated when you find a partner with the same trick in the genes. That is, with the same mutation. This was the case for Egyptian pharaohs and European Habsburgs, who didn't want their genes mixed with those of commoners. As a result, after a series of incest, they grew the famous Habsburg lip, as well as developmental delays and epilepsy on top of that. So your figure, eye color, and everything else you see in pictures is in your genes, but so are your ailments. But can mom's IQ or dad's alcoholism be passed on to offspring? That's an interesting question. To finally figure out what is encoded in the genes, there is one perfect experiment. We take 2 people with the same genes and leave them alone. Just observe how differently they live their lives. The similarities will be largely due to genes, but the differences are lifestyle and other factors. Yes, for the perfect experiment, we'd need clones. We take any unwanted egg cell, throw out its own nucleus and instead insert a nucleus from the organism we want to clone. Since the instructions for the development of the organism are stored in the nucleus, the egg cell will now read them and build the organism we need. That's how we got Dolly the sheep back in the day, and today a lot of sites offer to clone your dead pet. If the body is properly preserved, it is possible to clone even after many years. So we can clone mammoths? After all, the glaciers they lay in are essentially refrigerators. Alas, we need the whole DNA, and mammoths have been in the ice for so long there's nothing whole left. It's not just the skin and bones that are torn, it's the DNA inside them. You've probably heard how scientists recently resurrected the direwolf, but they were extinct long before the mammoths. Nevertheless, here are live wolf cubs in the arms of George Martin. Do you know how this came about? That's because no one's been cloned or resurrected. These are ordinary modern wolves, which have been edited 14 genes to become similar to direwolf from the past. As a result, the wolves were born a little larger than usual. Their fur became white, their voice changed a little, and that's it. Calling it a renaissance is like calling a new variety of wheat that's been made hardy a renaissance. If it's just a matter of whole DNA, then why haven't we cloned a human being? Maybe because it's unethical? Mostly because it wouldn't work. You know, on what attempt they cloned the very Dolly the sheep that was famous in my childhood. On the 276th, on the 276th, someone said, "It's not working. We've tried 276 times. No, let's try it again." And it did. In 30 years, of course, efficiency has increased, but even today, there are dozens of failed pregnancies, miscarriages, and other failures per successful cloning. The easiest thing to clone is cows. 1 in 5 survive. Why? I don't know, it just happens. Dogs and cats have a couple in 100. Why? We don't know. Thank God someone survives, and the first macaque wasn't cloned until a year ago. Here's a real photo of her. It took 25 years, and when we get to human cloning, the efficiency drops to 0. That is, we have not cloned a human being not so much because we feel sorry for him, but because we do not know how to do it, and if we knew how to do it, we would be happy to clone him. So the experiment we planned a few minutes ago on genetically identical people will not be possible? But why not? Nature routinely creates human clones, identical twins. In the case of fraternal twins, 2 sperm fertilize 2 eggs, and 2 different children grow in the same womb. Identicals, on the other hand, are 1 embryo that split into 2, and those not only survived, but grew into separate people. They're always the same sex. After all, they are literally clones. The genes of identical twins are so similar that if they decide to have children from different wives or husbands, according to DNA test, those will not be cousins, but relatives. After all, genetically, their parents are the same person. It's an American town with a colloquial name of Twinsburg. It's literally a town of twins. No, they're not born here, they just come here for the annual Twin Festival. See for yourself how similar they look, right down to the curly hair, even their eyesight. Because if one twin wears glasses, the other twin wears glasses. Now listen to the voices of these women.
I don't know, jealous maybe, I don't know, of the closeness. A lot of husbands don't like it.
You'll agree, they're exactly the same. And even in old age, the twins have almost the same figure. But what about the differences? Look at these guys again. See the moles? Where one has them, the other one doesn't. That's because moles are mutations you've acquired in life. Maybe someone out there spent more time in the sun, used less sunscreen. You can't write that in your genes. So are fingerprints. Finger pads begin in embryos as early as the 10th week, when they are only 8 centimeters long. But how they develop into loops and curls depends on the pressure in the womb and how your fingers rub against it. So Face ID may not be able to tell the difference between twins, but Touch ID will. So are twins only differentiated by birthmarks and fingerprints? Of course not. Let's look at all the differences at once and compare how different lives can be lived by people with the same genes. Scientists have indeed done such a perfect, I would say, experiment. But not with 2 twins, but with 30 million twins. Top universities, by the way, spend years discussing such topics and processes. And thanks to this study, we can figure out what depends on genes and what depends on the environment in just 3 minutes. Appearance really is almost pure genetics. Height, weight, metabolic rate, vision, and dental problems all matched in the vast majority of twins. But along with them, their eating habits also matched. Even more surprising is that, according to the study, 60–70% of twins coincide also with alcohol and nicotine addiction, as well as depression and anxiety disorder. But the temperament and character from childhood depends weakly on genetics, and by old age, the influence of genetics almost completely comes to naught. It turns out that such things as, for example, predisposition to alcohol are already sewn in the genes. In another study, scientists decided to go even further. You know the joke that sometimes, to become a successful businessman, all that's missing is one detail? Rich parents. Or not a joke. Really not a joke. Rich parents give a child education, upbringing, and most importantly, the opportunity to take risks. Failed and lost on the first business? No big deal. Open a second. But recently, we began to suspect that parents with genes pass something else to their children, genes associated with wealth and success. To test this, scientists studied nearly 300,000 Britons and found as many as 150 genes that affect income, but they don't affect it directly, but through other traits. For example, people with low income were more likely to have ADHD, neuroticism, and a tendency to smoke. Autism, strange as it may seem, has almost no effect on income, but anxiety and bipolar disorder can even increase it. But the most success was achieved by those who had a large head volume, good health, had no problems with sociability, and who had their first child late. In simple words, there is no single gene for wealth or high IQ, but there are dozens or even hundreds of genes that affect it indirectly. We have found out that genes affect not only appearance, but also everything that comes to mind, except moles, personality traits, and fingerprints. So genes are like a sentence that predetermines our entire life, right down to the paycheck? Not exactly. Look at the research on twins. They had similar height, weight, depression, alcoholism, immunity, metabolism, heart problems, and intelligence. None of the traits matched 100%. At least one pair in 10 always strikes out, and as the years go by, the difference between twins only grows. This is where our inner spontaneous geneticist will say, well, it makes sense. Old twins are less similar to each other than those just born. That's the way it is. But when do you think scientists began to realize why this was happening? Just a couple decades ago, because it's one of the youngest fields of science, epigenetics. It is a science that shows that genes are a two-way road, in the sense that not only do they influence the way you live your life, what you are born with, what you go through life with, but you yourself influence which genes are turned on and which are turned off. What's more, your lifestyle can leave a mark on your children's epigenetics. Look at these mice. They're hilarious, aren't they? That's because the scientists haven't started their experiment yet. For 3 days, the mice will be sprayed with perfume into their cells and concurrently electrocuted 5 times a day for 10 seconds at a time. What happened? Right, the mice developed a reflex. They became afraid of perfume odors. The scientists calmed down and let the mice have children and grandchildren. Then, these offspring, who are not familiar with the smell, were put in one room, spritzed there with perfume, and the mice in fear scattered to the corners. You see what happened? The mice passed on their fear through 2 generations. Their children and grandchildren didn't know the smell, but they were scared anyway. But when scientists studied the DNA of these mice, they found no changes there because they were looking in the wrong place. Fear was passed on in a different way. All because our heredity is not just DNA and genes. There are curlers involved as well. Not literally like that, but 10 million times less. Our DNA isn't just floating around in a cell somewhere. It's wrapped around these curlers, histones. Each gene has its own, and if there are too many of them, the gene will twist and turn off. Reading it is like reading a book from a roll of toilet paper. But if you remove the curlers, the gene is activated. That's exactly what happened inside the mice when they were introduced to a new odor. The olfactory receptor genes start working harder than usual, and with it a new fear is born. The DNA with the fear sewn in was passed on to their children, and then to their grandchildren, and only to their great-grandchildren did the genes twist back together. There are a lot of switches like that, actually. Most importantly, can you switch them yourself? You can influence even such a strictly coded thing as height. North and South Koreans are genetically very similar. They were the same people just a couple of generations ago, but here's a simple way to tell the difference. School children in South Korea are on average as much as 13 centimeters taller than those in North Korea. The gap between Koreans persists into adulthood, and it has been growing ever since the division of Korea. What's the reason? It's nutrition. South Korean children have more of it, and it's much more varied. Yes, something as simple as an excess of calories can make an entire nation taller, and this principle works with people of all genetics. Here's how the height of people in Europe has varied over the last 2,000 years. For the first 1,500, it just fluctuated up and down, but the maximum was 172 centimeters. Until in the 20th century, the quality of life jumped up sharply, and with it, the average height jumped up by almost 10 centimeters. We haven't changed much genetically since caveman times, but our standard of living and quality of nutrition have increased enormously. Genetics hasn't changed, but epigenetics has changed beyond recognition, and with it, growth has changed. If you've been watching this issue carefully, you may have wondered, if almost every cell in our body has the same genes, and genes are the instructions by which the body builds itself, then why aren't all cells the same? Why am I not thumb, foot, chin, hair, nipple, asshole? The answer is epigenetics. Remember, that's what turns certain genes on and off that every cell has. Well, every cell has its own epigenetics. It's what dictates to the cells what instructions to read and what organs to turn into. In essence, genetics is an instruction on what kind of body to create and how to manage it afterwards. Epigenetics is what instructions to pay attention to and what to ignore, and you can only influence a small fraction of all epigenetics. You can't turn a person into a leg or an ass, but while the body is forming, you can increase height or, say, penis. Guys, if you're getting ready to write down a recipe, you're too late. You should have done it in the first 6 months of life during what's called mini-puberty. Mini-puberty is the first time in life when hormones kick in. And the more active the SRY gene, the more testosterone you have, and the bigger and faster your penis grows. That's how it's determined. The activity of this gene is pure genetics, you can't influence it. But you can affect the production of testosterone. It's useless if you eat it separately, it's just digested in the liver, and that's it. But you can eat substances that produce testosterone, And what do babies of all mammals eat? Milk, of course. In this study, newborn boys were divided into 3 groups. Some were fed breast milk, others cow's milk, others soy milk. It turned out that those who were fed soy milk grew a millimeter longer penis in 6 months than those who were breastfed. And those who were fed cow's milk, on the contrary, the penis became a millimeter shorter, even if it's only a millimeter. Soy boys have the longest penises on average. But here's the question, can useful epigenetics be passed on in the same way that mice passed on their fear across generations? Here's another simple rule. Only the epigenetics of germ cells, eggs, and sperm are passed on. Yes, you take the rest with you to the grave. You get a good education and develop social skills, good for you, but your kids won't get anything because that's epigenetics of brain cells. You've built up your biceps, good for you, but this epigenetics will be lost in time like tears in the rain because they are also not transmitted. And if you let yourself go and go on a bender, you're wrong. The breakdown products of alcohol will affect the sex cells, and these consequences will be passed on to your children. What will that lead to? Children will not only get the predisposition to addiction, but also the side effects of alcohol. Without the alcohol itself, they may have an increased risk of mental problems or depression from birth. The effects can even reach the grandchildren. That's how all addictions work, and nicotine addictions too. You can see it in the genes, by the way. You take a couple of cells from the nasal pharynx, like in a COVID test, and see what genes are working now. And if that gene is awake, parents, look for cigarettes in your kid. Okay, you may think that for the life of you, certainly to the extent of your depravity, you can only screw up epigenetics, but you really don't. Fixing it for the better is also possible. Just 6 weeks of exercise changed the male test subjects' epigenetics. They didn't turn into the Belgian cows from the beginning of graduation, but they not only did more chest presses, but they also solved math problems faster, concentrating better, and generally pumping up their intelligence a bit. But if so much is in our hands, and we can twist the epigenetics within us in different ways, how come there are so many stories of twins living identical lives? Here's the most mediatized case, Jim Lewis and Jim Springer. They were adopted by different families, but both had a dog named Toy, a first wife Linda, and a second wife Betty, and a son named James. Both smoke the same brand of cigarettes and drink the same beer. Both bite their nails and suffer from migraines, drive a blue Chevy and vacation on the same beach in Florida. Only their hairstyles differ. One has sideburns and the other has short ones. Lewis also had a third wife. Springer didn't. That's all the differences. The problem with such stories is that they often can neither be proven nor disproven. That's why almost all such twins become the heroes of TV shows rather than scientific research. But here is a real case study from the scientific world in which twins lived their entire lives separately. And this case study shows how much everything in life is in our hands. These twins are named US and SK because one of them grew up in the US and the other in South Korea. We don't know their faces or names, but we do know that the former loved to study and got a grant in higher education. Then she became a lawyer, but due to infertility, she was never able to have children. Her sister, on the contrary, had 2 children, but her studies didn't work out. She refused to take some of the tests because their complexity upset her. At first, she worked as a cook, but then she got into religion. The only things she has in common with her sister are her looks, her love of volunteering, and her open-mindedness. At the start, the sisters were practically clones, but they lived in completely different families and grew up to be completely different people. Their paths were not chosen by genes, but by themselves. And thanks to epigenetics, their paths diverged. So don't write it all off on your genes. Your DNA is not a judgment, it's just a starting point. Thanks to epigenetics, it's up to you to harness the potential within you. Don't forget that. I hope you had fun. You owe me a like and a comment. Anyway, what do you think of this issue?